Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We're all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
Welcome to today's episode of Popcorn Psychology. Today we are going to be covering the 1997 Studio Ghibli classic Princess Mononoke, which was the top-selling film in Japan for a great many years until it was replaced by Spirited Away. But what we will acknowledge is that this is one of the most beloved anime films ever. And as we're going to dive into this film today, we're going to start off by acknowledging that this is a really complex film and very different than a lot of the other movies done by Studio Ghibli. This one's pretty rough. It's PG-13. It has pretty significant violence, pretty significant, complicated adult and young adult over and undertones about society and death and nature and capitalism. It's a very hefty movie, and something that I was just explaining to Hannah and Brittany that I don't know if our audience knows, I'm sure many of you do probably better than us, is that a lot of their films, or all of them, are all created with art first and then narrative added later. So they create a visual complete story through storyboarding before they ever even add dialogue to tell the story. And I think that's a really critical piece of information if you watch these films to understand. Sometimes it's very clear that there's a visual aesthetic, a visual story and narrative being told that sometimes it feels like the dialogue may be catching up to a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely.
So today we're going to be covering values and how they're formed and how they change throughout time, particularly through the critical aging points that people hit of starting to separate out from your family and culture of origin and getting into a larger world that forces you to change your perspective and adopt some truths that you may not have had, and how that can become something that people start to struggle with at different phases of life. And we definitely see that represented by some of the different characters we see in this film. And then we're going to kind of break down how we see that play out amongst some of our characters here with San, Lady Eboshi, Ashitaka, and Chigo. And then, as always, treatment and final thoughts. However, before we get any further, I'd like to remind you all that if you could, please take a second, like our show, rate our show. Our show only grows when you guys do that and share us with people who listen to us. We know we've had over 700,000 downloads now, and we're really thankful for that.
Wild. It's wild stuff.
It's wild.
It's amazing.
This is a show we put together literally in my basement, and we are at a level that is mind-blowing to us, and we're really thankful for y'all. But if you all could keep this going, keep this growing, and share it with people who may also like it, we really appreciate that. Before we talk about values and all that, let's do a quick plot rundown of Princess Mononoke, as simple as that can be. So in this story, we start out with a demon attack on a village. This story takes place somewhere around the 1300s in feudal Japan, and we see this exiled community being struck by some kind of worm-covered monster attack that turns out to be a boar. Mm-hmm. And this boar is attacking, and a young, handsome, athletic prince comes riding by on his elk, his red elk, and slays the boar, saving the town, but in doing so, he gets cursed with the same curse because the boar touches him. This leads to him being exiled from his community and having to give up his home because they can't have anybody leave, so he has to give up his identity as their prince and go seek his fate, knowing that he very well may still die.
And his name is
Ashitaka,
Yes.
who is our central lead character of the film, our paladin, if you will. He is the force of good in this film. You can look at me with nerd language judgment all you want, but that's what he is. He is the paladin. I will be relating all of these characters to D&D archetypes. You're welcome.
People don't know what that means.
Some people do.
Some.
A paladin is a knight that is devoted to a cause or an order or a holy god and maintains their commitment to their oath against all situations in commerce. That's basically Ashitaka. Anywho, as Ashitaka goes out into the world, he starts encountering a much larger world than his small and almost exterminated community has kind of isolated from, where he starts running into Irontown and meeting Lady Eboshi, and also meeting San, who is in conflict with Lady Eboshi. San is raised by forest gods and wolves, and then Lady Eboshi is leading Irontown, but is also the representation of capitalism and firearms development occurring throughout Japan, and it turns out to be one of her musket balls that killed the god. The boar god that cursed Ashitaka, so the plot starts to thicken. Ashitaka follows San into Irontown as San starts to attack Irontown Town, trying to rescue the forest and keep the miners and forgers at Irontown from going into the forest, destroying it to get to the iron they want from the grounds and from the mountains, which the animals and animal gods that San represents and is raised by want to stop them from doing. And then there's a third faction here, which is the Imperials, the samurai, and the local lord that are trying to also get their hands on the iron, because the backdrop of this story is sort of the fall of the samurai era, which was brought about by firearms, because samurai armor, much like knight's armor in feudal Europe, did not stop firearms. So their way of life is getting exterminated, and they're obviously resisting that. So we see these rival factions clashing, but all the while people are trying to conquer death and nature, which are two things that can't be conquered. And ultimately, nature and the circle of life went out in this film.
As it should.
As it should. And when everyone finally restores the balance of nature and realizes we can all thrive, but we can't take more than we're due, and when our time is up, and we got to stop trying to fight that. We reach the conclusion of our film, and a weirdly, I want to say agnostic, but that's not the right term. Like a anticlimactic ending. San and Ashitaka develop a little romance, but it ends strangely, is what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I'm with you.
It's very accepting of San getting to have her life, but it's a little strange. Like there is a resolution to the plot, because they what happens is one of our friends, Jigo, we meet along the way, who is a monk, is our roguish character. He is operating as an agent of the emperor, and his goal is to try to get the forest god's head to stop death, to also stop the fall of the samurai, because if there's no more death, then if they can't get their hands on the weapons, it doesn't matter, because they can't die, and they maintain their rule forever.
Holy Grail stuff.
Holy Grail stuff. And we see the conflict there, because ultimately what happens is the monk betrays everybody, including the forest animals, and leads a assault on the forest to try to cut off the head of the forest god, who represents the cycle of life and death, and succeeds in doing so, and then death starts coming for everyone until he restores the head.
Exactly. That's a good memory, Ben.
Yeah, good
I
job.
couldn't have said all that.
Well done.
So, values.
Values. With each of these three factions, or four, I guess, if we're keeping track, and can count, which is questionable in why I'm not a doctor, I can't count. But we see four very different sources of values coming into this film. But before we talk about the four different kind of factions we see in their values, we should talk about how people form values in the first place and why that's so relevant to their behavior.
Exactamundo. Because when I think about values, I think about motivators. Why do we do the things we do? Where does that come from? Why do certain things feel important to one person and not to another? Or even like, why do we both think we're holding the same value, but we're going about it in very different ways? So values is really good. I talk about values all the time with clients because I think it's important to understand why, like I said, why we do the things we do, right? And a lot of times when I'm talking about values, I will start sometimes all the way back into someone's childhood, because I think where you're going with that, Ben, is a lot of times our values are formed by both our family of origin and also the community around us, both like our micro community and also our culture.
Correct. All values for everyone are formed that way.
Mm-hmm. So when I talk about values, I usually talk about them in the context of like having people sort of list their values. So it'll be things like family, financial security, physical health, recreation, religion, spirituality, friendship, parenting, all that kind of stuff, right? And so I talk about values less in the abstract and more in the literal, more in the concrete. But it can also be things like, well, I guess physical health would be longevity. When people talk about like, I want to live longer, I value that, you know what I mean? So I have people think about what feels most important to you, but then also what are your behaviors attached to? And so that's what I think of when I think of values. I try to take it less abstract and more and more concrete with clients, to help understand, why does something feel so important? Why am I willing to do that? And when my partner gets on my ass about something that to them seems small, why does it piss me off so much? Because it's connected to a higher value that maybe they're not understanding, right? And values are very personal. Even though they are formed by the culture around us, they also in a lot of ways are very individual. And what feels important to me might not be feel important to you. And that doesn't mean that because I value something differently than you, that my values are the right ones and your values are the wrong ones. And I think what's so interesting about this movie is it does a good job of showcasing how everybody thinks that they're doing the right thing based on their values. And why people feel so insistent upon the actions they take in this movie specifically is because it is tied to these higher values that we will talk about later.
Absolutely. These values that we see represented in this film really guide our characters, just like they guide all humans. And understanding values happen essentially across 3 layers. There are some values that all things that are alive have. The basic needs.
Survival.
The biological needs, the core values of humans. Don't kill if you don't have to. Make sure you're protecting your loved ones, your children. Make sure you're eating and sleeping. These are core values that everyone who's born has, and every animal, for that matter. Protect your own. That gets pretty relevant, don't you think, in this film?
Yes, absolutely.
But then we form also our own values off what we're taught by our parents first, then by our education, by whatever religion people are brought up in, whatever larger cultural identities are present in your value formation, all show up in how you think about what you should do, why, and when, and what's important. And that can be different person to person, depending on how they were raised, where, and when, and by who.
And then also, life changes will influence your values. When people become parents, a lot of times you will hear them say, all of a sudden, my life and perspective radically changed. A lot of times people will say something along the lines of, I was really selfish, and now I feel more selfless, right? And that's because their value shifted from more like self-serving to I have to take care of this child and put their needs first, right? I think another thing that also can shift values in a way that I don't think I always think about is trauma. So then, like, when people go through trauma, that bumps against the value of what?
Survival.
So when you are having like trauma reactions later in life, that can be connected to the value of survival, right?
Absolutely.
I have to fight you. I have to flee because those triggers now are connected to my value of surviving. Whereas if you hadn't gone through a trauma, you might not have connected that value to those things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Understanding trauma brings people from a point of view where they are perceiving all the layers of value in a holistic way, every value you've ever encountered that's meant something to you, and snaps you back into the hardcore biological realities of you could die right now. And that can be where we get moral injuries. And while we're not going to discuss that in great detail today because it's not necessarily a huge part of this film, it's important to understand that there are things that we encounter in life that put us up against our survival. And oftentimes people have an idealistic way of teaching what we're supposed to do in those moments that becomes very culturally bound, that has shit to do with what your body will decide you're going to do, because your body is going to perceive the best solution and decide based on perception only when it's live or die right now.
Yeah, and I think that how that ties into this movie, kind of what you were saying earlier, Ben, this movie is pretty gory for like an animated movie like this.
Yeah,
It's
decapitations,
violent, I guess is the word I'm looking for.
arms falling off, like
All kinds of stuff.
And I think that's a good example of how, in an ideal scenario, we would value the safety of others, right? Like, no matter what, I wouldn't cut someone's head off or cut someone's arms off like happens in this movie. But then if that's tied to my survival, that value will be reprioritized. Like, the value of other people's safety and like not being violent will get deprioritized from my value of survival, right? And so a lot of this movie, I think, does talk about how different people view survival and how that leads them to do things that they wouldn't necessarily do in accordance with their morality and values in other situations.
Correct. And we see multiple moments where people's core values, what they've internalized from all those lessons, show up, and other moments where they respond in a more primal way. Ashitaka is a great example of that. It's not everybody in the world who will take an arrow or a bullet for another person because they believe it's right, but some people will. There are quite a few stories of Medal of Honor winners of people who did not survive a conflict by jumping on a grenade that saved a whole platoon. But it's not every person that would do that. How someone's values got internalized and developed and actualized right in that moment of survival or not will determine what they do. And they may not even know themselves. But seeing how complicated that can become is really important to understanding a story like this, that life has a way of pulling out our core values and also our survival instincts, and those can be constantly in conflict. Before we take a break, what might be interesting, especially from Hannah's perspective, would be how those start to collide with couples in particular.
Because this movie is all about conflicting values.
That's true.
As if you have one person in a couple who is from a more individualistic society and cultural background versus another who might come from a more collectivistic society, that can lead to some pretty significant challenges.
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel like, I don't know that I do specific values work with couples, but hearing you describe it that way, it definitely is. A lot of what I do with couples really is, what do you think is important and what do you think is important?
Yeah.
And how can we compromise
Right.
towards something that is comfortable for both of us? Or how can we share things in a different way where to you dishes are more important and to you doing laundry is more important. And so how do we figure that out? Right? And one of the ways that we can do that is the person who is feels the most value towards something or feels like something's the most important, you just do that then. You're the person who gives a fuck about dishes, then you're the one who's going to do them. You're the person who gives a fuck about laundry, you're going to do the laundry. And so that's one of the ways that I do that when I work with couples and even with families. There's a lot of, we've talked before about unwritten rules in families and how that has a lot to do with the values of the parents and what the values of the parents are and how that can affect their children and what they want their children's values to be. So there's a lot of different ways that values can connect to all different kinds of therapy.
Absolutely. And we'll get into that with each of our characters and how that makes sense in this film after this break.
All right, so we're going to start with the title of the film, San, or Princess Mononoke. A young girl. So was she a princess before she was taken in by the wolves gods?
No. I don't
Okay,
think
that's
so.
just like a cutesy nickname they gave her?
She's a princess of the forest gods.
She's a princess of the forest.
Okay.
So that's what
Got it,
Mononoke, I think, is.
Okay.
means.
So we get introduced to San, who is a young girl who has, like we're talking about, raised by the wolves.
Yeah, she's
And
like 16, 17.
Oh, okay. I feel like it's hard for me to tell with his animation style. Everyone looks 12 and a half.
Yeah.
Like you're either 12 and a half or you're a full adult.
Yeah.
And there's no in the middle for
Right.
me.
1300, 16, 17 is pretty much full adult.
Okay.
Okay. That makes sense.
Well, probably 12, 13. This is probably full adult.
Yeah. Well, what we would think of as full adult, remember at this time period, 16, 17 people are moving towards
On their
having
fourth
kids.
child.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
So she is a young woman who is raised among the wolves in the forest gods. And so we see in her right away that she is someone who is connected to the values of that community. So San is a young woman who is raised among the wolves in the forest gods. And I think she's a great example of, even though she is technically a human, right, a different species
Yes.
than her family that she's been raised with, she is connected to the values of them. She is fighting literally tooth and nail for the vitality of the forest,
Right.
for the vitality of her community.
She was once human. She's not now.
So that makes me think of with San that she was also abandoned by her family.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Oh, yeah.
why the wolves took her in. And so that's a trauma, right? So that's a trauma that she experienced. And because she experienced that, now she has a value that she hates humans.
Which happened when she was a baby. The wolves were attacking and threw the baby and ran. The parents ran.
Yep.
That's what the wolf says.
Yep.
It's like how in the second Batman movie, Penguin's parents put him in the sewer, and then he was raised by penguins.
I'm so glad that you said that.
We're doing your work for you, Ben.
That will not be the last Batman reference today.
I'm sure it won't be.
But I do.
And that's why he rides so hard for the penguin people.
Do I?
No, the penguin.
The penguin.
Oh.
The penguin. He's silly.
Yeah.
I'm like, what?
So I think that is a really important part of San's story, because it seems like it would be easier for her to lean into the values of the forest in order to connect to her new family.
To show solidarity. To fit in. To adapt.
But I guess more of what I'm trying to say is it would make a lot of sense if you had a trauma where you were abandoned, that the family that accepted you, like, you're going to like hardcore believe everything that they are giving you.
Like really identify with it.
Really identify, maybe over-identify with it almost, because they're the people who saved you, and it feels like you have to be on their side, I guess.
Well, you kind of. I
mean.
think that can be true whenever I'm working with someone who is taken from one community to another, maybe rescued by one community, is that they want to fit in, right? That's also like the value of survival, right? Is like a lot of times when people will assimilate,
Yes.
is to survive, right? Because that's connected to being taken care of.
Yes.
To not being ostracized. And she's someone who's already been ostracized.
Yes.
And so to not have that happen to her again, you're right. Like, I get why she rides hard for the forest and the gods and the wolves, is because she needs to do that. And that's something where I don't even think that she would be cognizant of that. Like, that's one of those things where I don't think she's thinking about that when she's doing all this stuff.
No, she's Mowgli.
Yeah.
Just, some of the things that are important. She's Mowgli. She was taken in as an infant. She doesn't know what she's not. This is all she's ever been. But everyone around her knows what she's not. So she has to fight to prove she is, which can cause an over-identification with the adopted group. And that certainly becomes true of San. She is extremely aggressive.
She's vicious, which I kind of love about her.
Me too.
She's like a fair little animal.
She is, but she fights harder than the wolves do.
Oh, yeah. She's spitting blood out of open wounds. She's climbing up roofs. She's high. She's like all up on people's business. She means it.
She is a druid. At the in D&D terms, she is identified with nature. She will defend nature at all points. Nature is better than anything else, and anything that intrudes upon that.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Death
totally
comes your
agree.
way.
And so, as we know, as what we've been talking about, when you identify so strongly with a value, the people that seem to be in opposition of that value are your enemies, your antagonists, right? So obviously all the people that she's fighting against, all she sees is how they are destroying what's important to her. All she sees is them overcutting the forest and trying to destroy them, right? Like, in her mind, they are the villain and she's the hero.
Correct.
Yes.
Even though she's actively taking life and doing the things that are against what she's necessarily wanting, because they have crossed a certain line of survival, that action becomes warranted even though it's not necessarily within her full value system.
Yeah.
And looking at why that's especially important to consider is there is no pure character in this film. It makes it a really complicated one to watch because no one is represented as a true hero. Ashitaka is the closest to a hero we have.
And because he has the benefit also of being almost like an unbiased third party.
Correct.
Like he's coming in fresh to this situation.
Correct. And he rides in and kind of adheres to what is almost closest to objectively right and seeks to solve conflict and see the middle sides of things rather than lock into his own perspective, because the samurai exterminated his race of people.
Oh.
And he has every reason to be very angry, and he doesn't choose that. But when looking at San doesn't know necessarily who she is outside of who she's been told she is. And she doesn't know who humans are outside of the perspective of animals, which gets complicated really fast when she's at least part human. Like, she's not someone who's been transformed into an animal, but it's said by other characters in the film that the wolf goddess has kind of taken over her soul.
Oh, I missed that.
Oh, same.
Okay.
Okay.
That she has some reign over it, and that's kind of how she gets sort of the immortality-ish kind of godlike features that she gets, is because the wolf goddess has a kind of controlling interest in her, which is why after the wolf goddess dies, we see some values challenging done by San, and she becomes a little less warlike. Also, the war stops, but
Okay.
a little more
Holy
freedom.
shit.
Yeah.
I guess at this time, me and Hannah can say that this is the first night I've ever watched this movie, so there might be things we've missed that we could gain on a second watching.
Yeah, for sure.
Also, it's really hard to see a Japanese monk voiced by Billy Bob Thornton.
I know that's right. That was
in
weird.
those- yeah,
that
yeah,
was weird.
yeah.
That was a weird take.
Right, it's weird flex.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, so it's a weird flex, and some of the really important dialogue and information may or may not be true, but I think it's more or less true, because when she drinks the blood and is, I guess, kind of taken on by the wolf, she's kind of taken into that godlike status. So she's a demigod at like Hercules.
Percy Jackson.
Possibly.
Sure.
I mean, I think what's coming to mind also with you saying this is how if we can understand values, it can also help us access empathy in terms of perspective, right? Because you can you can see in the movie how when San comes into Irontown, how they all view her as, like I said, like this feral animal. They probably would use the word savage if they didn't use that in the movie, which is a very loaded term in the United States.
Yeah.
Because we used to use the word savages a lot. White people would use the word savages a lot to talk about Native Americans, First Nation people, right? And I think that's what is also coming up for me in thinking about this is how when they say like history is told by the victors, how we can dehumanize others because we are looking at it through this lens of like, I don't understand them. Why would they act like that, right? And I think this movie is a good representation in like the San character of, if you're looking at her from the perspective of the Irontown people, she would look maybe how the white colonizers in America would think about the people that were already here, the indigenous people of America, of like, why are they fighting us? Look at them. They'll come in and they are aggressors and they'll hurt you and they'll, like all the horrible propaganda we would talk about, right? Because they were only seeing it from their point of view. Whereas for San, and like when we think about indigenous people, like they're viewing the Irontown people, the white people, as these colonizers that are coming in and they're trying to destroy us. So of course we're going to act accordingly to preserve our culture, our land, our lives, and how it is good to think of things that way when we're trying to be culturally competent and just more empathetic, that like we have to be aware of like what perspective is driving the narrative.
Correct. It's really important to remember that in the simile you've drawn here, that the people who were coming into the United States were taking from nature at a rate that threw off the balance of the circle of life that led to food and survival for everyone, and then just slaughtering the buffalo herds for their tongues and leaving them to rot in the sun meant people would starve on the plains because they wouldn't have enough herds to feed everybody, etc. Throw off the whole balance of nature for greed, and that ties directly into this story because it's a human greed issue. It wasn't Europeans versus Native Americans. That's just North American history and South American history and African history and world history.
Yep.
People come from other places and don't understand the culture, values, and balance of nature, the ecosystem, there's the word I was looking for, that exists in a particular region, and think, ooh, well, this resource is rare to us, therefore it's valuable, so it's worth me killing them to get it because it will advance my stature, where they're going, what are you doing here?
Yeah. Or even the idea, which I know kind of slides into talking about Irontown, of this idea that like living beings are already here using these resources.
Correct.
Like this idea from like the more like Lady Abashi point of view of like, oh, we found this place and so we can do with it what we will.
It's ours now. It makes us rich.
And totally deluding themselves of the fact that there was already things, people, human beings here.
And nature.
Well, that's what, nature here using this stuff. Mm-hmm. And like in the colonizer stories history we're talking about, there's already people here using these things.
Correct. And they're using them at a rate that has made sense for a long time to their culture and has kept their culture alive. They worked out a delicate balance with nature. And then industrialization tends to have the opposite effect. And looking at Lady Abashi and Irontown and where they, or what they kind of represent in this story, is the growing movement of industrialization and the power of greed over the forest and the animal kingdom that had existed before, and how they're completely blind to the impact that their greed has on destroying that habitat when there could be a balance worked out, but they choose to absolutely ignore that. And the forest and the gods come from their own perspective of having seen things work a certain way for a very long time, and they're willing to fight against that.
Yeah,
with
like
everything.
The ape tribe says, we got to kill these humans because they ain't letting us grow back the trees. We grow back the trees, they cut down the trees, they got to go. And because the Ibashi Iron Tribe, Iron Town, all of them, they are the villains. They are a threat. They are an existential and literal threat.
To the forest, they are.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So do we have anything else we want to say about our friend San? All right, we'll take a break here. Since we've started talking about Irontown a little bit, let's keep that up. So Irontown is led by Lady Abashi. What do we know about her?
She's a bad bitch. No, Lady Abashi, she's a lady entrepreneur, which I wonder, it does make me wonder culturally at that time what that was like.
It would have been rare.
Yeah, I assume so, but I also don't want to assume that based on white culture that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
So she is a female entrepreneur, business owner. She is running this iron mine, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are deforesting to mine for iron. I think I'm using the word deforest, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Deforestation.
Okay,
Yeah.
just make sure.
Yeah.
And
Strip mining, basically.
yeah, and she is creating firearms, and that is pretty revolutionary, right, at the time. And not just firearms for the sake of firearms. The feeling I got from her is that she was creating firearms so that she could arm the people that she was supporting as like a way for them to protect themselves too.
And tip the balance of power.
Yes, I think that's kind of what I mean. And so she's someone that is creating firearms, and she could definitely be seen as like the villain, right?
Yes.
Evil corporate lady comes in, starts fucking up the local ecosystem, cutting down trees pretty maliciously and unfeelingly, unempathetically. She's like, this got to go. She wants to kill the forest spirit god, cut its fucking head off pretty much. And she also has moments in the movie where she's like, leave the women, fuck them, we gotta go, right? In a lot of stories, like, I think it would stop there. She would be just this very two-dimensional villain, right? I think what's interesting about her, kind of going back to what we're talking about with like the complicated value systems of the people, is that she takes care of people who are disenfranchised, marginalized within the community. The women who work Irontown are women who were sex workers that she seems to have saved from like the brothel lifestyle, and they're very grateful to her. And then she also supports a lot of people who are suffering from leprosy, which was one of those diseases at the time that was very connected to karma and value, like character value. Like people would say like, you have leprosy because you're bad or something. Like it was part of a class system kind of thing in a lot of different countries, actually, I think.
Yeah.
And so she takes in a lot of people that are normally discarded by society, which makes her like a very interesting, complicated figure where she's not all bad and she's definitely not all good.
Yeah.
But it is, I did find it very interesting watching this, that they complicate her in that way specifically.
Yeah, she's a complex character for sure. She sits in the kind of neutral, like true neutral alignment where she's willing to do good or bad, whatever suits her and whatever suits her mission. I think she, by the look of her, the way she's drawn, she looks like she was samurai. I believe she has 2 swords on, which is a firm marker that she was samurai. She's obviously trained. They make great links in the film to indicate once she takes her robes off and stuff that she's wearing very ruling class samurai style kimono and traditional dress of the ruling class, and women were part of that class. There were female samurai, and she carries all the markers of it, but it looks like something happened or something obstructed her societally from obtaining her goals, and she's rebelling against it. And she's finding outcasts from society to protect and to bring into her mission. And she is protecting and rescuing people from the dregs of society. She's rescuing lepers and giving them jobs and giving them a place in society, as opposed to what would have happened at the time was to be banished to leper colonies on the coast. And you go live in a cave until your skin falls off. But they say she bandaged us, she caught our rotting flesh, and like gave us work. And she seems to hold great respect and doesn't seem to fear that she's also going to contract this horrible disease. And these...
Yeah, because if I remember correctly, the people who have leprosy are the ones who actually come up with the designs for everything. Like, they're the creative part of the mine.
Oh, didn't I say they're the R&D department?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they're the gunsmiths.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Right. And so they actually make the weapons. And like the undertones to her is she's rebelling against samurai society and is recognizing the shift that's coming, which we know happened everywhere. She's taking these people into the fold and no, we're driving progress forward. We can't stay stuck in these old ways. But something in her value system must have changed to make her resent that so fiercely that she's willing to fight against it and tip the balance of power to her. So she has control now, and she's trying to remake society in her own vision. And she's taking women who've been cast into brothel life and giving them empowerment, sort of.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I feel like the women feel very taken care of. They feel respected. They feel like they're being taken care of. Like, and I think that that's something that I would imagine coming from a brothel in the 1300s was probably a nightmare status. And so I feel like when somebody, again, right, when we talked about earlier about trauma having an effect on your values, it would make a lot of sense that these women would feel very strongly about Lady Eboshi and feel and want to follow her and want to help her and want to do things for her because she took them in and she's taking good care of them.
To a point,
for sure. Even though, like Brittany said later on in the film, she says, leave the women, don't worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
She's willing to sacrifice them.
She was willing to sacrifice them in that moment. And I think a part of that might be because her goal became bigger than the women.
It always was.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, she says, I've done all I can for them. They're on their own now.
Yes, that's what she says. Yeah.
There's a caveat to leave them, but I've done all I can for them, which is also false.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But within her value system, she's justifying her manifest destiny, if you will, to tip the balance of power and complete this mission of exterminating the forest god, who is making the animals smart and capable of fighting against her and blocking her will. If she exterminates that forest god, she can have a clear path to conquer the forest.
Yeah. And this is where you could even get into a more nuanced discussion of values and motivators, right? Does she take in these people because she genuinely feels like they deserve a safe place to be, that they deserve to be taken out of these situations that maybe she'd been in at sometimes, like take them into a place where they feel more empowered? Or does she know, is she wily, and does she know that if I take in these kinds of people, they will be so grateful to me that they will follow behind me no matter what?
She's that, mostly.
Mm-hmm.
Because these are always her servants. Like, the women are treated well, and
they're treated well as compared to being at a brothel.
And compared to many places, but also they're not doing great. They're working 4-day shifts. Like, they have their own little community. They're given some agency and respect over their lives, but there's a huge glass ceiling and there's no way to step up.
Well, and also there's a ton of misogyny. Those guys that work there talk mad shit about these women, right? They basically call them whores.
Yeah.
Dirty whores, basically, in more subtle language than that. Well, not even really that
wasn't
subtle. Not subtle.
They said, like, look out for the fishy smell or something. that was
That's true. I couldn't remember exactly what they said. All I wrote was, wow, these guys are misogynistic. And so it's like what we're talking about, which that Abashi will create a safer system to a point. But she's not creating a system where she's like, don't talk about women like that, where there's more like true egalitarianism going on.
Are we starting to say that she's Lady Abashi, the breaker of chains, the mother of forges?
We're talking about Daenerys?
Yeah.
My main girl?
Yeah.
If she's your main girl, you missed the point of that movie.
I think the show missed the point.
I know
of
that's
Daenerys
right. I know
Targaryen,
that's right.
Okay.
Agreed.
I think she was always going to take that route, but
We'll see what the
it
book
was
say.
it was a bad.
Yeah, whenever
It
that
was bad
book
writing.
comes out.
Never
George.
on the 10th of never.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Exactly.
like, yeah, look at Lady Abashi. She's complicated, but there's clearly something that's causing her to start compromising both the values of the samurai and also the values that she's setting up for these people that allows her to pursue her own sense of why is the word ambition, I guess. Is this the word I'm looking for? Her own ambition seems to rank higher than anything else because she has placed herself and this mission above everyone else's needs. The representation she's sold to these people is, I'll keep you safe so long as you serve me. But when that clashes with her mission, she's quick to abandon them.
Yeah.
Because she'll find more, showing her true value she places on them. At least that part does.
Yeah.
Or even just like hubris, right? Of believing that, which we can all fall into, of believing that our viewpoint and our greatness is what's most important. Like, we are currently in our society struggling with a lot of people like this, like the Elon Musks, the Jeff Bezos, the politicians who are very much like, I am the way, the true, and the light.
Correct.
And so to keep me prioritized, to value me, is to value the future and society and my brain and my ambition, like you were saying, Ben. And that other people are more, are less valuable, are more disposable, because they don't have as much to offer the world. And so this is where like people can also take values, ideas, and kind of twist them to fit their needs, to do, I mean, we all do this, mental gymnastics, to justify ourselves to ourselves. I'm sure there's stories that Lady Abashi's telling to herself about why it's okay that she's doing stuff that looks on paper horrible. I'm cutting down all these forests. I'm fucking up all these animals that were already here. These gods, which that's tempting a lot of bad energy and vibes, and what she must have to tell herself to make that okay as it aligns with her values and ethics.
Correct. She's literally informed that her weapons are responsible. That's Shitaka's entire point of talking to her, is informing her weapons are killing the gods of the forest that are changing the world for everyone.
Making them into demons that go into other communities and fuck their shit up, like pollution, basically.
And poison, including him. Like, he's got proof. And she's like, nah. These samurai hurt me and fuck them.
Yeah, pretty much.
At all costs.
Which could be coming out of a trauma that she experienced.
Yeah, that's what I was
right?
Oh, certainly.
too.
Absolutely. To be that hyper-focused on the goal the way that she is, I think it would make a lot of sense that would come out of trauma.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
She was stripped of something and hurt.
Yeah, for sure.
And she's taken power back.
That's the last fucking thing she does. That's what she's doing.
And it kind of makes me think of when I do values work with clients, sometimes where I have to kind of like throw down the hammer is, are you really holding up to this value you're telling me that you believe in, or are you prioritizing your ego? like, and then when I say ego, I mean how it connects to like your defensiveness of yourself, and that can show up as a trauma reaction. It can also show up, like we talk about with couples. This is a good one. Do you want to be right, or do you want to have a good relationship?
Exactly.
You could argue that's a values conversation.
Oh, it's certainly.
Do you want to value your relationship, or do you want to value your ego?
Yeah.
And what that connects to.
Exactly.
Right.
And
right or happy.
Yeah. And so I think with someone like Lady Abashi and people in the real world who remind me of her, that's something to contest with, right? And some people can't look in the mirror and really acknowledge where they might be prioritizing values like my ego. Most people know that wouldn't be good to say out loud. It's not going to feel good to say and not going to feel good to hear. That, like, I actually value my physical appearance, my status,
my
more
money.
than anything else, money, right? And so we will connect sometimes those things to values that feel more palatable to justify, like I said, justify ourselves to ourselves and others. Like I said, like a lot of things that maybe we'll talk about this more with Jigo, is where we can be prioritizing things that are very individual and self-serving and telling a story that, like, no, actually it's because, like, I'm so important, or my mission's so important, or what I bring to the world so important that I have to be doing this stuff, and you all should be grateful for it.
Correct.
Can you tell that I'm thinking of Elon Musk really hard as I'm saying this?
I mean, there's a meme going on about him going around about him for the past couple of years. It makes me laugh really hard. It's a really unflattering picture of him taking a sun shower somewhere that says, "Bro had enough money to be Batman, but chose to be the Penguin."
Second Penguin reference, one episode. The one I always think about is everyone, this is years ago, back when he still had kind of a good reputation, is that everyone thinks Elon Musk is Tony Stark, but he's Lex Luthor. And I was like, ooh, I read that and it forever changed how I thought about him. That was like started the crumbling of him in my mind.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Right.
That makes sense.
And, when we see these characters, like Lady Abashi kind of represents a fallen paladin, a vengeance paladin, or oathbreaker is what it would be called in D&D, where she's representing a promise, but she stopped. And there's consequences to that. And those have to be sorted out before you can get on the right path again. And that's absolutely what happens to her. She must be humbled from her ridiculous ideas that she is larger than this community that she represents, that she's sworn an allegiance to protect, and then she stops protecting them. And she nearly loses her life.
Yeah, she loses her goddamn arm.
She does.
And then she's like, maybe I'll chill
Yeah,
out.
so what I kind of wanted to ask both of you is, what do you think about her saying, we're going to do it better next time? Do you feel like she'll be able to shift her values after having that experience? Or does it feel like she won't be able to, she'll fall right back into that pattern?
So which experience? Because I think that's an excellent question. Or are you talking about like the totality of the whole experience, or just the wolf head ripping off her arm?
Totality, losing the arm. Just, I think also the impact of like death almost like encompassing everything.
Yeah.
The way I think of it is like she's witnessed the bigness of what she was trying to conquer. And she got her ass handed to her.
Yeah, pretty much.
I agree.
Pretty much.
And I think that's an excellent question at the meat of the story. Do I think that's enough to cause a value shift for her? I do.
So do I. That's why I was just curious what you both thought, because I really feel like, because it went so badly.
Oh, so bad.
It went so badly that I think that is enough for her to kind of take a step back and look inside and kind of figure out, like, I don't think that value is actually serving me anymore, and I think I need to do something different.
I mean, it's what we say all the time, right? That people change when they're uncomfortable enough. And if this ain't her rock bottom, baby, I don't know what is, And this is the reason, like, the real world examples of this are why people come to therapy, right? Like, something catastrophic happens that changes something really huge for them. They lose something very significant. They've learned a lesson. They can't keep doing things the way they used to.
They cannot. And I just had one of those I had a
spark.
I had a teacher once tell me that I think she liked to watch the gears go in my head because they'll go click, 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 and then lock onto something. And I just realized who Lady Eboshi reminds me of. Wanda.
Maximoff?
Yep.
Oh.
So long.
Okay.
So long as Sam Raimi or whoever wrote her story in Multiverse of Madness isn't writing her story,
That's true. Yeah.
I believe the answer to your question is, would this be a big enough event of actually facing down pure extinction and a world-destroying event enough to shift her values of realizing, oh, you must in fact accept the truth that death and life cannot be conquered by any living thing. It is for the gods, and it can't. It's a spiritual thing. It's just truth, hard truth. Can that be messed with, conquered, defeated? No. And is that enough to cause a shift? Yes, but to me, it almost harkens to like Wanda realizing the effect she's having on other people in WandaVision, realizing that her maintaining this narrow vision of this reality, holding onto it and not accepting the truths of the world, that no one can conquer death and life.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And then that being enough to cause her to drop that and like finally grieve whatever Lady Eboshi is not facing in her life.
Yeah.
She's playing out in progressively more, I don't know what the right word is.
Dangerous?
Sure, we'll go with that. Dangerous ways that have significant impact on radiating like layers of exponential destruction on everyone else because she won't deal with her shit.
Yeah. And also, I think because she friggin' lost her friggin' arm, that's a reminder to her every day, right? To stay humble. You know, that's like a lot of, when you come from that more like egocentric mindset, like this happens a lot of people when they have to do recovery from substance use, right? Is that you have to keep mindful of like your humility within the situation.
Yep.
How easily we can lapse into old patterns of behavior, old ways of thinking, like sort of quote unquote the easy way out, if you will, even though it's not easy on you. And so I think that if she hadn't lost her arm, if other things like that had happened, I could see maybe her slipping back into it. But I think because it had such a she's a profound reminder that's going to affect her every day for the rest of her life. She's going to have to change the way she does everything. That I think that might be enough for her to stick to the change.
I agree. It has potential.
Yeah.
Will it? I don't know. Will she follow the path of Wanda and retreat back into it? The path of Teddy in the Shutter Island story, where he comes face to face with how bad his trauma is and chooses to
continue to ignore it.
Further retreat, even to the point that his ability to make independent decisions is taken from him and he doesn't have to do it.
Yep.
It's a risk with her and the ambiguity, but she seems to have shown enough shift that it's hopeful.
When I was watching videos about the film this week, people did very much talk about how she had a shift at the end, and how they really felt like they really believed that she would be able to create a more natural town this time. People felt very hopeful about that.
That if things stay in balance, she's trying to use the natural resources of the world that are given to us and the natural evolution that comes without destroying everything, but only taking what can be replaced.
Yeah.
If she learns that message and accepts it, she would grow. And seeing as this is a teenager's kind of story, it makes sense that might be a lesson to learn at that age.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, do we have anything else we want to cover with her? I feel like that was an excellent coverage of her character and the ambiguity of it.
I'm good.
Brittany is good.
I'm good.
I am also good. So let's take a break here. So our lead, our paladin,
Our main guy.
our main bra,
That's what I put in my notes.
Yeah.
as played by Billy Crudup.
I know. And in real life, Billy Crudup and Claire Danes, who does the voice of San, Princess Mononoke, they got together in real life. It didn't last. No offense to them, but that's interesting about who they play in this movie.
Yeah, for sure.
Indeed. And the prince is such an interesting character as the nature god is the Christ figure of the story, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. Even the beginning of him getting cursed by the demon, and then the only choice he has is to leave his community and he can never come back. Like, he loses his complete and full identity automatically and has to go on this quest to not die.
Which he might anyway.
Because it's demon stuff.
And his culture, right? Well,
I hear that.
I don't know what else to say. Like, he's fucking cursed by a demon. I mean, that shit's fucked.
They're like, you gotta go, and I never want to see you ever.
Right? Due to our laws, we can't even watch you. Like, you got no ceremony. Just like, cut your hair, get out.
Yeah,
because you're gone. You have to leave us. But that's important. He has to hold on to the truths that feel most secure to him, because that's all he has left.
Well, and it also makes me really curious if we had got to spend more time with his village, with his people. I assume that they have a really highly evolved moral value system, because he is so, like we were saying in the beginning, he almost like rises above all the foibles that everybody else is falling into. Like, he maintains this very empathetic, neutral, curious, open-minded stance that is almost like inhuman in a good way, like the Jesus-y part of it.
Yeah,
like rising above a lot of the stuff and having like a high moral standpoint.
He does. He maintains his like lawful good to neutral kind of alignment, where I'm going to do what feels like the most right thing to me. But he is also like, is that like, yeah, I'm sure his culture does have a very set way of viewing things and has become more inclusive as they were almost exterminated. They say kind of in the beginning of the movie, there's only 500 of them left, and they're getting weaker.
Yeah, the Amishi people.
Right. Mm-hmm. Their genetics are getting weaker. They're essentially, it's implied they've reached the point of starting to inbreed and like trying to fight against that, and recognizing that their time on the planet as a cohesive tribe may be coming to an end.
Yeah. But it does make me curious, because they are so isolated. Is that why they're able, like someone like Ashitaki can exist that has such moral high standards, right? Because I guess the assumption is like they're just not as corrupted by everything else.
Well, and also, I mean, yeah, I think so. But then also they have to figure out how to compromise. They have to figure out how to maintain a certain level of morality, I feel like, in order to continue on with their journey of trying to keep their people.
And cooperativeness.
Yeah, they have to be cooperative. They really have to compromise, because there's not that many of them. And so they also can't experience the loss of making rash decisions.
Right. Well, they can't murder each other out of anger.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. So it holds them to a higher standard.
So it kind of holds them naturally. Yes.
Their survival's tied to behaving.
Yes.
And being good to each other.
Yeah.
Which is a great point. And what it also makes me think of, because when I was reading the Wikipedia page about this movie, one of the themes, other than like the obvious ones of like environmentalism, stuff like that, is like the loss of innocence. And when you were saying about that with like that tribe and how they are isolated, and so that kind of also allows them to live in this way, is how when we are younger and our world's smaller, if we are safe, right? Like, I'm sure we all know kids and teenagers that we've worked with where they're so sure of everything. Everything's so black and white and right and wrong, and good people do that and bad people do that, and it's very unnuanced. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes.
And then as you get older and you leave, like Ashitaki leaves his little community and goes out into the world, he's exposed to all these more complicated ideas, right? That sometimes you actually may hurt someone to save someone else, like kind of like ethical trolley problem kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it's so hard to have those conversations with teenagers and kids because they are so sure of themselves, which is they're supposed to be.
Exactly.
Good for them.
It's where they
Don't
are
wanna squash 'em.
developmentally, I mean.
And there's so little wiggle room sometimes around why people do things that don't feel good or look good, right? And I wonder if that's like the loss of innocence that is sort of explored in this movie too, of like he's being exposed to this idea that things aren't always able to be as clear cut as we would like them to be, right? Every side's trying to kill the other, and they are doing it for their moral reasoning, right? Mm-hmm. And people don't always leave you the option of having like a safe and peaceful compromise.
They do not.
Which sucks.
Yeah.
It does. It royally sucks.
Yeah.
But he seems real comfortable with that, because when he rides into that battle,
Yeah.
whoever he sees as the aggressor, he just immediately shoots with his bow, and because of his now demon arm strength, like their arms are just getting lobbed off by his arrows. And
That
like,
was bananas.
That was crazy.
That shit was bananas. When his arrow would just like pop a head off or pop off an arm, it was like, what the fuck? But again, it's because of that demon energy.
right, and I guess he's a Pallock. He's a paladin warlock. Multiclass has got that demon.
I feel like at this time in the podcast, I should explain that Ben right now is leading a D&D campaign that he has manipulated Hannah and I to be a part of.
That's such strong language for
offered to teach us how to play D&D.
So it's
include
fresh on
you in a group.
So it's fresh on his noggin,
yes.
which is why I feel like you're using so much of these vocab words.
I am. Also, a lot of my network uses them and now speaks it. So, we learned to speak it in the pandemic when there was nothing else to do besides learn things none of us thought we'd ever do, including D&D and golf. And then
Ew. Golf.
Oof.
there was nothing else to do for like 3 years. So
I mean, we get it. We watched everything.
Listen, I understand that men have to create a sport around taking long walks with their friends.
Yeah, it's very sweet.
I mean, some of us just try to snuggle, but the others are a little too masculine for it still.
I mean,
so.
that's how wrestling got created, right?
Yeah.
That was obviously usually done for men to be naked with each other and
Exactly.
to rub
What?
bodies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Ugh. You poor guys.
Yeah.
I know.
Toxic masculinity is
Just
a
want
bitch.
a friend to nap with me like Chandler and Joey.
Yeah.
Or not Joey, but Joey and Ross.
Yeah.
My wife would yell at me for that. Anyway.
Yeah.
I think looking at Ashitaka, it's really important to understand, like, he's got a really clear-cut sense of right and wrong, and he does have to start recognizing he can't just ride in and start, like, dismembering people
Yeah.
with his new, godlike powers, because the demon force inside of him tries to take control.
Yeah.
And that starts to be a values conflict of he's getting this rage to strike that's not coming from him, and he saw how that consumed the boar god.
Yeah.
And he's fighting to not become that and to solve these problems before he loses his battle with that. And that's a lot for a teenager to recognize of, yes, in fact, the world can scar you, damage you, and force you to act outside of your will out of fear and anger. And you are not immune to that because you decided you weren't going to be.
Yeah.
And that's what egocentrism leads people to think. Like, one of my favorite questions to talk to first responders about is, in your early career and childhood life, who were you taught that bad things happen to?
Oh.
And they always have the same answer. Bad people.
Who are those?
Well, that too, but I mean, think about how simple we teach children.
Yeah.
But when you ask them, and now that you've been on the job for 5 years, who do bad things happen to?
Everybody.
Everyone. And
Yeah.
then usually there's a second term added to it as some synonym of indiscriminately. And it's easy for you two because we're all therapists.
Yeah.
We know. We don't go
Well,
on the
that's
front lines
something
of
we talk
things.
about with clients all the time is like,
Right.
sometimes bad things just happen.
Yep.
And not because you deserve it or they deserved it or you did anything wrong. It just happens.
Yep.
And that's really hard. That's a really hard lesson to learn in life.
It's a really hard, and
It's a really mean lesson.
it is.
Acceptance.
And sometimes it's because of evil, and sometimes it's become a circumstance. And sometimes evil latches onto circumstance, a la Lady Abashi.
Yeah.
Where we struggle to find the lines, and he struggles to explore that because he gets kind of taken in by her and sees the ambiguity of where she's at. Like, finding someone that's on that neutral evil spectrum that's tough to figure out. Like, okay, but they are doing some good, but their base is like, is this someone I need to exterminate? But then that, forest rage in him is like, kill this bitch.
Yeah.
Well, and I think also an interesting influence, and maybe this is why they had the kind of like flirty romantic stuff in it, is that he starts to get a crush on someone who is demonstrating a lot of behaviors that he maybe wouldn't have aligned himself with.
But are now awakening in him.
Yeah. So that complicates it too. That starts to complicate his also sense of morality as well.
That's a good point.
Oh, I can like someone who does stuff like that?
Yeah.
And when you're younger, there is this more like hardcore sense of, like we were saying, bad guys, good guys, of like, well, if they do that, they're a bad guy and I can't possibly like them.
Especially if I'm the good guy.
Yeah. And so that leads to what we have talked a lot about in this podcast before, dialectical thinking. And when I have to use that with clients, when they have a really hard time wrapping their head around the fact that there's someone that they know or that they love, or maybe even themselves, we're like, how can I be both this and that? It has to be a button there. And then I'm like, well, you can put an and in the middle, of like Lady Abashi. This can be someone you've met who has done horrible things and has done really beautiful things for people who really needed help. And both those things can be true at once. And sitting in that is so uncomfortable for us because we do like to choose a side because it's simple.
And usually promotes survival.
Yeah. Who's the us and who's the them?
Correct. As at some point, the world will force you to make a choice.
You got that right.
Though sometimes that choice doesn't come, or you can decide in degrees, a la Switzerland. We let everybody bank here,
Yeah.
so nobody's going to invade us because we control everybody's money. But then you're still making a choice.
Yeah, a non-choice is a choice. Silence is a choice, Non-action's a choice.
Right. And Ashitaka really chooses along the moral lines because that's the only identity he has left,
Yeah.
is to represent, I carry this burden of saving the world within me and making it to the forest god so that I can stop this curse from affecting everything.
Yeah.
And me.
Well, he also has the benefit of, even though he's coming from such an isolated community, he also kind of oddly has the benefit of like seeing the bigger picture because he's coming in from as an outsider, right? Of like, this isn't just who's going to win right here.
Right.
This area of the world. This has lasting impact. Right. And that's connected to a higher value of like the world, right? Which we see now in modern day world, which is climate change, right? What are we going to prioritize? And people saying, well, we have to prioritize these things that hurt the climate because that's connected to survival, while other people are like, what does that matter if we don't have an earth to live on?
Correct. If we're living on Kevin Costner's Waterworld,
oh God,
among the worst films ever made.
Oh God, Waterworld. I haven't thought about that in so long.
Never saw it. Never will.
Don't.
Oh, we'll watch it.
Oh God. Anywho, but I think you're right that Ashitaka comes in with an ability to hold an and. He has the ability to hold the dialectical thinking. Both things can be true simultaneously where other characters can't. Like,
Sorry, Ben, which I think is connected to the bigger picture that his community had to always hold in hand. If we want to survive, going back to survival, if we want to survive, we have to figure this the fuck out.
We got to be collective, like hyper collective.
Yes. Yes. Anyway, go ahead, Ben.
Oh, yeah, it's good. It all ties exactly together. And it's important to recognize how him coming in with that outside perspective, like you guys are mentioning, allows him to tie that higher truth in to break through people's values that are now also getting corrupted by survival, that we have an enemy present.
Yes.
This is not a cultural myth we're perpetuating to prepare people to deal with something, the wolf is at the gates. Literally.
Yeah.
That is our introduction to Lady Abashi's people. A wolf attack by San riding the wolf pups and being told, like, oh, they're big, but they're not big. Like, those are the pups. Wait till you meet Mama.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they shoot Mama.
Yeah, they do.
But it's still, yet again, works into this higher narrative that Ashitaka is representing. You guys need to get off your bullshit and recognize we're all gonna die
Yeah.
if you keep this up. And they're like, no, but these people are trying to kill us. And of course, the minute Lady Abashi takes her guard and leaves, the samurai, led by the local shogun, attack. Mm-hmm. And she is now forced to work with our boy, the monk.
Jigo.
Jigo.
So should we take a break there?
We should.
All right, we'll be right back. So coming from a super outward, hyper collective lens, let's narrow right back down to a super individualistic lens, a super self-serving lens, which is Jigo in this story.
And Jigo is such an interesting way to represent that because Jigo appears to be the wise old man
He
archetype.
Very
Yes.
unassuming.
Yes. He does.
Worldly, sees everybody, knows everything. He knows all the secrets. He knows people's culture. He recognizes Ashitaka for being of his, what was the
Amishi.
Amishi people. Is like, I see
Oh,
that
because
bull.
the elk, right?
The
Oh.
bull.
Okay.
In particular, the bull.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
There's a big interchange about that really lets Ashitaka kind of be seen as, you know, who he is and of his people, and he has a big conversation about that, but appears to be not a snake. But goddamn is he.
The worst.
The worst, but he doesn't reveal himself. He appears to be just kind of like advisors, kind of
Yeah.
around, like kind of like the,
He just seems to pop up.
right, kind of like maybe I'm the cleric-y kind of person, the connection to spirituality and morality, and I'm kind of neutral to everybody, but he is most certainly not. He is on his own side. He is a sneaky who is,
The sneakiest sneak there ever was.
Yeah.
and he's on a mission to get the head of the forest god for the emperor, so that the emperor no longer needs to fear death and keep his reign going forever, and then doesn't have to keep fighting Lady Eboshi anymore. Which I think probably lends to the undertext that it was him, or it was the emperor who cast out Eboshi in the first place. Or someone like him.
Sure.
And then
Yeah.
it's really complicated for her to trust Jigo, although Jigo probably was not revealing to her that he's on the Emperor's team until the
That
end.
he's playing every side he can.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think she catches on until the very, very end, where he finally reveals that he wanted it for the Emperor.
Mm-hmm.
I think. That sounds right.
And where he represents a particular danger is he doesn't care. He's chaotic. He doesn't care what happens to anybody.
Yeah, he's just looking out for him. Somewhere along the story of his life, for whatever reason, he decided that his value is number one, numero uno, right?
And that's it.
And that's it. And he's
And we also
forsaken other stuff.
know the least about him.
Yeah.
I would say we have the least amount of background from him as well. So we also don't really have a lot more awareness besides what he shows in the film as just being self-serving.
Right. He's representative of a lot of characters that seem to exist throughout some of the stories of yore, and Japanese movies seem to have this character show up, and even though The Last Samurai was kind of Dances with Wolves with Samurai,
Never saw it,
aka
never will.
Avatar with Samurai, but there's definitely a character in there who's representing a little bit later in this process of firearms coming in, of the westernization of Japan. It happened after Commodore Perry started bringing Western uniforms and military culture, and the samurai really resisting hard as they're facing their own extermination. that's the central point of this one. But there's always a character like that, like the guy in 300 who turns over the Spartan goat path to the Persians. The kind of deformed character.
Yeah.
Who can't hold the shield, and the Spartans reject him. And then the Persians welcome him in and give him a harem, and
which I think is
status.
Also how you can become self-serving like that, is if you feel ostracized by a community, if you feel like no one's taking care of you. That, I mean, that's also like a lot of like people that suffer from like pathological narcissism. A lot of times that's a product of trauma,
right?
You know, and they're not just born that up their own ass. Like it's like, I have to take care of me. I have to take care of number one because no one else is going to.
Right.
And I need to be hyper prioritized and how much that's connected to your survival.
Correct. And this character is represented in media all over the place. You see it over and over again. They're frequently carry some status in society, but not enough that they get jealous and they get really close to power without having any, really close to money without having enough, and no recognition. They start to seek that and start taking matters into their own hands for their own means. And thinking of Game of Thrones, there were two characters in particular who are among the most powerfully dangerous characters in the series that fit this archetype very, very well. Who am I thinking of?
Littlefinger.
Ding, that's one.
And you wouldn't say Viserys, would you?
Varys.
Is that what you're thinking of?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, look at me.
Well done.
Well done. Yep. Exactly. I think those are great parallels to
Littlefinger, especially. What a bastard.
Yeah.
Varys too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
I think because we get more of a backstory of Ferris, I can have more empathy for why he does the things he does. But Littlefinger feels like more of this character where you just don't know.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of fill it in with a lot of just like more of that moral black and whiteness we've been talking about.
And this character he doesn't care. He's going to do whoever's going to pay him. And he's going to organize his forces to do the shady thing. And like you see, like, they kill all those boars that the boar god leads into war, and they do it deceptively, which is very against the balance of nature. Destruction with mines and gunpowder, killing mass numbers of them, which is very against the theme of this. Like, killing something to eat it seems to be relatively regarded as okay. Killing thousands of them in one fell stroke, try to shift the balance of power while deceiving them, and then wearing their skins to get close to the animal god feels real gross.
Oh, real gross. I forgot about that part till just now.
Me too. And
I also didn't like how they moved.
Oof.
When
Creepy.
they were wearing those skins.
Creepy collie.
I don't think you were supposed to.
Ugh.
Yeah. Yikes.
But I think recognizing that there are ways that people form values that are connected to no one and nothing but themselves in these stories always represent the most dangerous and least predictable character. And it's important to remember like who you're letting close to you, who you're letting provide context to the world, and watch carefully what people do, not so much what they say. But I think Jigo is a really interesting character to look at, and it's important to include as we're looking at values versus acceptance. He's accepted he'll never have enough, so he does whatever the fuck he wants.
Yeah.
And if he's someone that has experienced ostracization himself, then it becomes a thing of like, I've accepted that I'm not going to be part of a group anyway, so I might as well get mine.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
You know?
Yeah.
And also, too, I would say, depending on the culture he grew up in, like our culture, American capitalistic culture, we also do a lot of moralizing of that very linear way of success. Like the way that we believe we're a meritocracy when we're not. But also like the way that we assume billionaires or millionaires earned that, you know, because they're better, smarter, whatever.
And if we just idolize them enough and try to form our life around them, that we can do what they did, and we can have enough money. We just haven't wanted to bad enough yet.
I literally, my last note when watching this movie was my paraphrasing of the John Steinbeck quote that everyone thinks that they're a temporarily embarrassed millionaire. And that's why people will like vote against their own interests and act against their own interests, because I'm not an actual poor person. I'm a temporarily embarrassed millionaire.
Right.
And I was like, I think about that quote all the time.
It's pervasive throughout history, in our own history right now, pretty firmly entrenched in millionaire, billionaire worship.
Exactamundo. Anything else we want to say before we shift into treatment?
Nope. I think it's a clear picture of how these values collide and the ambiguity and lack thereof.
All right, let's take a break here. So treatment, we've kind of like touched upon treatment here and there. You know, we were talking about Lady Abashi and stuff. Something that came to mind for me in thinking about treatment was thinking about the groups of marginalized people that are in Irontown and how much they're willing to do things that we would maybe describe as immoral because they have connected their resources, getting their needs met and their survival and their dignity to Lady Abashi and this iron mine, right? And how that is a way that people will get stuck in these cycles. And in like, even when we've talked before about why people will do like criminal behaviors, right? And
join gangs.
Yeah, that's a great example. And how I think from a more broader treatment lens, I think what is helpful to actually cut through this kind of stuff is having social services programs for people so that they can have dignity, resources, get their needs met, so they don't have to rely on people with slippery moral values, and then they don't have the desperation factor where they are willing to compromise maybe even their own values for their survival. You know, so in this situation, part of maybe being able to hold that compromise between like Irontown and the forest is having resources that can come in and lift up the community so that they can't be corrupted by Lady Abashi and her agenda, where they don't feel like they have to. I think a lot of what we see in our country too, like why people want to keep doing coal mining and stuff like that, is that they don't have resources to do something else, right? And so you have to provide people with an opportunity to get their needs met in other ways so that we can evolve all together and make choices that are good for the collective. We can't just be like, just get on board. Forget about the fact that you don't know how to make a living besides relying on fossil fuels, you know, because we need to help climate change. What does climate change mean to me if I can't afford to take care of my children, right? So I think it's just good to know that in order to help people grow and help communities grow, we do have to go in and provide resources that help people be able to make more values-based decisions that aren't just survival value. So that's kind of what I wanted to highlight, because sometimes people will be like, social services, like, why do we need things like that? Because that is a deep part of asking for change as an individual, is you have to make sure that people get those needs met.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I feel like something else that I want to add to that is they have to be well-funded social services. A big part of the problem in our country is that they are not well funded. They are not properly funded. And so that then creates a scarcity experience for a lot of people. There's a lot of people who need this kind of support. And we, in this country, one of the values that we have is not about poor people. We don't give a fuck about poor people. We don't give a fuck about marginalized people.
We say we do.
We say we do, but we don't. And none of our actions match that. And so also, you know, all three of us have worked within agencies and had all different kinds of experiences. And I think a big part of what I always hoped could be better is the funding of some of the social services, that it could be more consistent, that it could be just not based on donations. If we got to run something based on donations only, like
Grants.
that's not going to be enough. It's just not.
Nope. It's not, and it produces the same problem over and over, that the most qualified staff leaving only the least qualified staff, who are also the most burned out, to work with the highest need people.
Yeah, it's fucked.
And none of us do it anymore.
And none of us do it anymore because we don't have to.
Which is fucked.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you see some of the best people stay and do that, but they choose poverty or
Yeah.
near poverty to provide that mission. And having well-funded, well-resourced, well-educated staff and societally elevated and received social services that are given a status within society that's not, well, that's good for you.
Yeah.
It's good for you. You're taking care of those people. They really need help.
Yeah.
But anywho, like looking at the importance of that and how much change that can create, it creates class mobility, which doesn't exist in this story. People get stuck in the world that they have, which the example of people that are coal miners or farmers or whatever other devalued class that is also simultaneously incredibly necessary for society to function. It creates a big problem that people also are taught that poor people are bad, and that you may be poor, but you're not as poor as them. And if you like your children to eat, you got to keep doing what you're doing, and you can't look at the world beyond that because that's not relevant to you and people like us. And that creates a really dangerous dynamic that keeps people kind of like it's happening in Irontown.
Yeah.
They are operating against their own interest because they're not willing to go backwards, because if they go backwards, they know how bad it is, and they're not willing to give that up because they don't believe they have class mobility. They're sex workers living another life, right? That's what they
Yeah.
And lepers cast out. Anybody else will just exterminate us or throw us on a rock.
Yeah, which is what's so funny about that is that there's more of them than her, Lady Abashi. They could rise up.
Almost always.
She gives them guns, but they would never turn them on her.
No, they
She
wouldn't.
knows what she's doing. I hate to say it.
She rolls high on that charisma stat.
Yeah, she sure the fuck does.
She's got that riz.
Yeah.
Nat 20.
Right?
Was there
Yeah.
anything else?
Did you just speak D&D? Look at you.
Everything I learn is against my will.
That's false. You guys played D&D before I did.
We
So-
did. We did.
We did.
They're misrepresenting here.
We did play.
Anything
Years before I played, for that matter. Yeah.
like 2.
That would be more than one. So plural's appropriate.
Cut this out. Anything else for treatment we want to talk about? Any other specific characters that we wanted to get further into?
I don't think so. I feel like the plot resolves a lot of things. I think having social services and some kind of re-grounding to a value of some degree of spirituality, not religion, but spirituality and recognition of that there are things that are bigger than you. Kind of like when we were talking about with substance use, people must accept that they are not bigger than the substance they're trying to use and their body's chemical affinity to it, and that they, like everyone else, are susceptible, and in 12-step language in particular, more susceptible to fall victim to the power of the substance. And I think the opposite also is true with, in a good way, with spirituality that people lose connection with, is that there are things that are bigger than us. There is a natural order that is larger than any of us, and we must accept our place in that. and that we can't destroy the earth on which we live if we would like to have a place on which to live.
I would say the only thing maybe treatment-wise, but I'll keep this really short, is they probably could do with like a mediator of some sort, a third party that comes in to help with the compromising between Irontown and the forest.
Yeah.
I think it is really hard to not get in your own head about your, like we talked about survival, your needs. And so that's why people will go to therapists to do like co-parenting coaching and mediation because they sometimes need a third party to direct the conversations, to keep it on track, to keep it constructive. So I could see like maybe as an Ashitaki type being helpful ongoing. Yeah. Someone with an outside perspective that can keep them on goals.
Yeah.
Keep the mission statement solid.
And a drawback yet again to the reminder that none of us are bigger and none of our immediate needs are bigger than the world that we should live in. We can not sacrifice that. So we must come back to this idea. We're all playing on a level playing field, and let's de-escalate so we can approach things from that standpoint yet again. Because the minute they lose track of that, we get war.
So we'll take our last break here and be back with final thoughts. All right. I can go first.
Okay.
Now that we've talked about this movie,
I know, I feel the
I'm
same
liking
way.
it more.
I know, I feel the same way.
I came in like very like take it or leave it. I do want to watch it again.
Same.
Because I do feel like kind of what we were talking about in the beginning. And I probably said something very similar with Spirited Away, to be honest. So this is only the second time I've watched Miyazaki movie. The other one being Spirited Away for this podcast when we did it there. And so like this style of animation, this kind of storytelling, it isn't something I seek out and watch myself. I just don't connect with it emotionally for whatever reason. I think it's just like a preference thing that I don't really have a lot of control over. So it's hard for me to grab onto it, and maybe for the reason you brought up earlier, Ben, with how they create the movie and the art is the way that my brain's trained to consume things through this culture is just has a hard time adjusting to it, right?
It's an adjustment. Yeah.
So I do think I would want to watch again to see what I can appreciate now that we've talked about it and I've already seen it. And I feel kind of the same way about Spirited Away. So I don't know if I would ever watch this movie a ton. I'm interested to watch it one more time to like see what I get out of it in a second watch. I do really like the character of Princess Mononoke. I love a little girl. Well, in my mind, she's a little girl, but like a young female character who's kind of like bananas. Like I said, she reminds me of Louise Belcher. I like those kind of characters. Maybe because I'm an Aries. I like connect to that kind of vibe. But I do think it's very cute. I can definitely see why people love it. And like I said, it's one of those things that just isn't like my type of art, but I can see the beauty and why other people love it so much. And I also would be curious what one of these movies would look like on the big screen and how like all encompassing, like I could see that being a very different experience than watching it at home. So those are kind of my thoughts on Princess Mononoke.
Okay. I'll go next. So I feel pretty similar to how Brittany feels. I feel like after talking about it and getting a better understanding of the characters, and I definitely want to watch it again. I don't know if I can say that I like it.
Yeah, same.
And
honest.
I want to watch it again because I feel like it also deserves another shot to really experience it now that I kind of am not trying to figure out what the fuck is going on the whole fucking time.
Yeah,
which is kind of what it felt like.
I think that's how I felt about Spirited Away too. Like my brain was trying so hard to like keep track of what's happening that I wasn't like experiencing it almost.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, it is. So again, like I totally understand why people love this film, and I'm excited to give it a second watch. And I think that it was really interesting to talk about this film today.
So I'll go next. This film is near and dear to my heart. We watched this at like a Operation Snowball staff sleepover. Like we all kind of like were in a basement kind of bonding and working before we did this huge I don't know how to even describe Operation Snowball, but like where we were peer teens kind of like working on creating like large group, small group weekend experience where we were the staff facilitators, and we had to learn to bond because we're going to be dealing with people's real emotions to not only the skits that we do, but also the speakers and this whole experiential kind of like Tavistock group program that I was part of in high school and even junior high. And we needed to bond, and we had kind of a sleepover at one person's house to do this. And somebody brought up watching this movie, and I'd never seen anime stuff really outside of Dragon Ball Z, which one of my friends really liked. Dad never did it for me. I was like, Dad, I don't get this. And that's fine. I know people love it. It's okay. It's just not for me. But this movie struck me. Like the beauty of the art and the incredible animation and the storytelling was huge. And I think watching this was something that just broadened my mind, even though I think I was 15 when I watched it, and some of it was overwhelming.
Yeah.
Like the messaging and the oppressive realities, it's a lot. And there's a lot of watching that go really bad in a really profoundly violent way in this film. And it caught me off guard. I didn't expect any of that from this. And watching it again now as an adult and looking back on it without the egocentrism of being 15.
Right.
You see a little more echoed truth that we have all realized as people who are helpers who sit and listen to people's stories, that there are truths, and these are it. We must take care of our world. We must recognize that none of us can conquer death, and we must recognize that everyone has their own agendas, and if we have any hope of peace, we must be able to both understand and recognize, but also stay true to the growth the world affords us. Like the opportunities for growth the world affords us. We cannot stay stuck in the messaging of our elders, because the world will grow and change. There's a Hebrew proverb I found doing research, I think for this podcast or maybe for a paper that I was writing, but there's a Hebrew proverb that as a non-Jewish person I wouldn't have come across, but it said, don't confine children to your own learning, for they're of a different time.
Oh, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
I like it a lot. And this movie kind of covers that. Like,
Yeah.
at some point we will have to go into our own world and face the truths that were hidden from us, that either our elders didn't know or didn't want us to perceive yet.
Mm-hmm.
But the balance of understanding, you still get to find your own path and do what's right for you, and that can change things, but not everything. But I like this movie. I don't know how often I'll seek it out, because it is a lot. It's a lot. It's sensory overload. It's emotional overload. It's hard truths all over, and then just complete sensory overload. And watching it on the TV that I bought that's huge with a huge sound system is a lot too.
Yeah, it was really getting me.
Maybe
from the side.
I was overwhelmed.
Maybe I was just
Ben
fucking
has
overwhelmed.
a
surround system, so the one speaker was right over my shoulder, and I was like, "Ooh, spooky ooky."
Yeah.
Yeah. When I had a kid and I wasn't going on vacation, so I bought a really nice sound system for my TV, and it's a lot. It's like, oh, have you had Atmos sound in your house before? No, I have not, but I want it. And then you like feel the sound all over your house like you do in the movie theater, but the screen is nowhere near as big and not expecting it. Oh shit.
Agreed.
Well, on that note, as always, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Popcorn Psychology. If you want to get in touch with us, you can always write to us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com. If you would like to support us, we really appreciate it, as we are a totally self-funded DIY podcast. So if you want to be a Patreon patron, we really appreciate that. If you are a $10 or more patron, you get early unedited access to our episodes. If you're $50 or more, you get to pick the movie that we talk about for an episode. That's pretty cool. If you would like to support us for free, the best way to do that is to give us a review, and to hopefully give us a 5-star review and send us a nice little message in that we will read to each other and find a lot of warmth in our hearts about. And thank you for listening.